In this episode, I'm excited to have Dr. Craig Chalquist back for a third time. He is a former psychotherapist and the current academic program director of consciousness, psychology, and transformation at National University. Craig has two PhDs, one in philosophy and religion, and the other in depth psychology, which means our chats are potentially a bottomless pit of thoughts and ideas about, well, the deeper meaning of everything. Before we dive into our chat, please like this episode or video, make sure you're subscribed, and turn on your notifications. The extra step of leaving a review, rating, and sharing helps the algorithm reach a wider audience. You can also support me as a creator by becoming a financial supporter for as little as $3 a month, or you can make a one-time donation to support me, and I'll provide a link for that in the description box. So, on to today's episode. Craig is the author of many books, both fiction and nonfiction. Recently, he started a movement to bring people together to imagine a new world. His calming presence on TikTok educates and inspires us to see ourselves as creators and lamplighters, striving to usher in a new age of human flourishing. A lot has happened since we last spoke in July 2024. We turned down a path as a country, and no one will escape the consequences. We're all being squeezed and pressured, which can feel disorienting at the very least, and even terrifying. Some people will be hurt more than others, financially, psychologically, and emotionally. Some individuals are even in danger because they are targets of hate and violence, as well as illegal acts committed by our own government. We all must do what we can to help, speak up, and not stand by in the face of evil. But what else can we do during chaotic and dangerous times like this? Those of us who are fortunate in our circumstances are being called to reflect on ourselves deeper and the roles we're best suited to play as we navigate from the dismantling of stagnant systems to the new paradigm that it's already taking shape. Although we cannot see it yet, it is emerging, but it's not guaranteed to take hold just yet. We must be intentional about our energy too. The laws of the universe do not care whether you believe in them or not. We attract what we are. This is the most basic and important natural law. This means we cannot remain in the muck. Anger, fear, and even moments of despair are meant to capture our attention and prompt us to evolve. Discontent is life's way of telling us there's more for us to receive and to give. How do we pull ourselves out of the psychological muck? Well, by pretending we're in a completely different world, the one we desire. We achieve this by imagining what doesn't exist right now. Einstein said that he received the entire theory of relativity in a dream. The emphasis here is on receiving. Einstein's mind didn't create it, it came to him when he was open, and then his mind communicated it. He received out of what transcended him, and his discoveries changed the world. Today's conversation focuses on your openness to the new paradigm that is already taking root, even if it isn't visible to you yet. It's not about forcing anything. It's about receiving guidance from a deeper source of wisdom within us, which connects us to what transcends us. And we're all connected. It doesn't matter what role you play, whether you're a visionary, teacher, artist, scientist, philosopher, business owner, parent, healthcare worker, or a restaurant server. Your existence is an expression of divine intelligence, creative intelligence. The universal forces are poised to flow through your unique experience of being human right now, bringing something new and better to the world. Many people who are unconscious have been swept up by a negative version of universal forces. They are fulfilling their role as agitators. Now it's time for you to play yours. When you consciously say yes, you will feel embraced by a new sense of purpose for good. I think you're going to love this conversation. So let's get started. Well, welcome, Craig. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Happy Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure you've been very busy this week. There's so much going on, and you have a real job. I guess I sometimes forget you actually have a regular job because of what you're doing outside of it. But I love your what you're doing on TikTok, and I've been scrolling through all of your videos, and every once in a while there's this one that really takes hold.
Mhm.
And one of the things that it goes viral that I'm curious about is like, have you noticed anything? And is there a pattern to like what is happening in that particular video? And of course, it could intersect with something that's going on in that day in astrology, whoever. But I just wonder, like, what have you taken away from, your TikTok experience, and how does that contribute to sort of how you're evolving your purpose these days?
So I can't always tell if something's going to be widely seen or not, but until the moment I start recording it, and then I get a feeling about it,
Hmm.
like, yeah, you need to say this, which I don't get with most of my videos. They're kind of casually put up on the internet, but that one, like I posted that one on March 19th, I think it was, where I was talking about outsiders and visionaries and dreamers. And as I was doing that video, I intended it to be casual, but as I sat there recording it, it felt important.
Is this the one about the edge people?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah, that spoke to me. So, well, this goes to what we're going to talk about, which is, the receiving, the being receptive to imagination, to image, which doesn't come from our mind, and that we are being pulled towards something, but we can't see it, which is the point, right? It doesn't really exist until, in quantum mechanics, until we see it. Like it doesn't exist until we see it, but we can't see it, but we can intuit something that's happening. But yeah, that video, I'll put the link to that one specifically in my description box because I think you're right that that group is larger than we know.
Huge. Yeah. There was, I mean, for a little context, if we have the time,
Hmm.
when I was in college, I was going through a lot because of how I had grown up in a abusive home and just stuff coming up to process. And I was always growing up, even without all that, kind of reflective, kind of in my visions, in my dreams, things like that. And so I was talking to a professor of English who I felt safe with in college. I think I was a sophomore. And he said, "You need to read Hermann Hesse." And so I started reading those novels, and Hesse was talking all about this and how some of us have one dimension too many and things like that. And it's a theme in all of his novels. And so from that point, I started to become conscious that I liked to go more deeply into things than most people around me did. So
Oh, I love that. Wait, what's his first name? Herman?
Hermann
Herman.
Hesse.
Oh, well, that sounds like me too. Like I was saying, I can drown by my own thoughts. So, yeah, I wanted to start with one of the other videos, one where you answer, or you don't really answer, you pose this question, is human consciousness evolving? And I guess you were trying to get people to sort of think about it maybe differently because, sometimes these phrases get generic or commoditized. And so we think we know what we mean when we say evolving consciousness. But you talk about your criteria, being we need to answer yes to some questions. And then you also talk a little bit about, so you can touch on that. You also talk a little bit about reimagining a new story for the US, for our country, and that you talk about how what's happened is there's these sort of two stories have coalesced, or people have gathered or coalesced around two stories, which reminds me of Jung, right? The transcendent third. Like this is the age of like the transcendent third, like taking this or that, this and that, and finding, how to integrate it to create something new. So yeah, go wherever you want with that.
Yeah. The philosophy program I graduated from really likes that evolutionary framework, and I have mixed feelings about it.
Mm,
Mainly because, and the program was aware of this, that there's a lot of colonial shadow around the idea of evolution
mm,
that goes back for quite a long time. And so, as a framework, I tend not to use it. I tend to think more of maturation, more like developmental psychology. I don't know if there's
mm.
such a thing as developmental sociology. Maybe there needs to be if there isn't. But
Ooh.
the way groups mature, the way we learn to regulate our feelings and know that we're responsible for how we show up in the world and things like that. And so I think that, and my fiction talks about this, I think that as a species, we're trying to learn from our own elders who already do this, of, in terms of how to move forward together with it, how to grow up. I mean, look at our leadership, in this country. It's more like rulership, it's not leadership.
Yeah.
And it's horribly immature. So, that's a piece of what I was getting at. And then in terms of the country itself, I like Van Jones' distinction. We've got this split between the real America and the ideal America.
Mm,
And the ideal one is the one, yeah, USA, and we're the best and all that, And then, the founding fathers as these perfect individuals, which of course they weren't. And then the real America, more like slavery and poverty and racism and homophobia and all that. So it seems like what we need is a new telling that you put it really well in Jungian terms that leans on both, but gets us to a higher place. Something that's aspiring, something that we can get behind. And if I could give an example
mhm,
of what I think needs to be part of this story, I've been doing a lot of reading about what I call American gnosis. And this is my first time speaking about this
mm,
publicly because I'm still immersed in the research. But gnosis is a nice old Greek word. It literally means knowing, but it's come to mean down the centuries a kind of spiritual knowing, like when we understand a dream, a deep knowing, where the dream just makes sense, or we have a spiritual experience, an awakening of some kind, that's gnosis. All these are gnosis. So in this country, there's a tradition of American gnosis that is uniquely ours, and it has different roots. So, of course, it starts with the people who've always been here, the original people in our section of the continent. And so a lot of it is infused with their spiritual traditions, practices, things like that. That's how it grows. Think of it as a tree that's growing
mm.
sometimes. So then it doesn't evolve so much as blend with other things like Black spirituality. So there's the influence of the Black church.
Mhm.
And I was listening to I hadn't heard some spirituals in a while, so I was listening to some of them. And I've never heard such strength in human voices as when I listen to spirituals. The yearning for freedom,
Mm,
it goes right into the soul when you listen to those carefully. And so all of that spirituality, and some of it is from the Black diaspora, all the way back to of course, slave days, and then Afro-Caribbean influences, things like that. So that's part of American gnosis, and then influences from the Far East, transcendentalism, things like that, right? Lots of esoteric activity, spiritualism, new thought, eventually the New Age, all of it in the soup. So I don't look at this as a lion of evolution.
mm.
That would imply that, for instance, that American Indian spirituality used to be simple, and then, the spiritualities that came later improved on it somehow, which I think is nonsense.
Yeah.
I like to think of it more as everything getting added in. And what occurs to me sometimes with American gnosis as being part of the American story is the image of what Americans call the tea ceremony in Japan. So it actually, elements of it originate in China, as does the tea itself. But down the centuries, the way of tea, as it's known in Japan, has evolved to become uniquely Japanese. And in the same way, our roots in all these different forms of spirituality, they come from all over the world, the Middle East, the Far East, you name it. But they have formed themselves down the last couple of centuries and then the time before that into a uniquely American spirituality, which is something I think we can rally around.
Oh, I love that. Well, so many things come up, of course. I mean, you're hinting at sort of the connection between the individual and the collective, of course. So you reference in the video, we sort of know generally the stages of development of a human being, and it's kind of common sense to say, yeah, that's a mature person. No, no, they're still kind of acting like a 2-year-old. And I have heard people who sort of study outside of our country, because our country is relatively new. Well, not for the Native Americans, but what we did to it is a new form
Yeah.
of government than European countries. And I've heard America referred to as an adolescent in our development.
I
That
think
and
that's optimistic.
well, as I was listening to you, I was like, no, maybe 2-year-old. And no offense to 2-year-olds, because two
Yeah,
year olds, not much is expected of them. They're literally learning how to be a separate individual, right? So they're not
yeah,
expected to be responsible about it. They're just learning. So, yeah, so there's that. So, we can kind of use that as an analogy that as a collective, we're really immature and irresponsible and acting out and having a temper tantrum. But,
yeah.
and yet there is this movement that of people who are more conscious, and they have coalesced in some pretty stark things. But then there's everything happening in between too that we don't usually see. And then when you talk about gnosis, it reminds me of, and I say this to my clients, that the root of knowing is relating.
Hmm.
So it's
Yep.
to relate, and we relate through the body, not the mind, right? So there is this, if you only know something through the mind, as many religious people know something through the mind, and that they read a concept, for example, in a spiritual teaching, but it's not an embodied knowing. And so then it's incomplete knowing. So, you can talk about then what is evolution feels like now where there's this circling back, because before we became mind heavy, we were more connected with nature. And what now neuroscience and neuropsychology is confirming what sages knew thousands of years ago, right? So it's like this, I feel like I don't know, that's this circling back, which is not a regression. A circling back isn't a regression. It's like this spiral. The garden auger digs down, brings something up from the past, our deep, our stronger connection in nature, for example, brings it up, and then we explore it within the context of our new ability to use our mind. And so therefore then there's that transcendent third where there's a whole new perspective. So I love it. Mm, yeah, there's so much there. So, okay, then another video. So I just had fun listening to some of your videos. And this one was about also, like, I just think the way that you talked about in those videos, I had never heard that before. Maybe you're around people that think about it that way, but I hadn't. So I just think it's really interesting for my listeners. So the video was about the idea of the American dream.
Mm.
And I got mad because I remember getting mad in the 90s when I read Chalice and the Blade. If you read
Yeah,
that Rian Eisler
yeah,
book, and I was like, oh my God, I've been lied to. All
yeah,
this time I've been lied to as a woman, and
yeah,
so this isn't the first time that our history has been attempted to be erased. And then we go find things, and now they're trying to erase other people's history. And so I got really mad too. And you
yeah.
talked about how, I want you to explain it, but you talked about like, well, and this also, well, I'll talk about Marianne Williamson later, but so I guess first just talk about what you mean by that. Like, what was the American dream at the founding? And it was reflected through our founding documents, of course. And then the 1950s is a really, really interesting time period where a lot of indoctrination started being happening. So
Yeah.
yeah, so just tell my listeners about that, how you think about that.
There's a there's this process that goes on in other countries too, and of course ours, where an idea surfaces, and it's often an idea of great beauty, but then the powers that be get a hold of it and they start dumbing it down. And of course, a recent example is the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr., which in many ways was a speech about the need for social justice and equality. And it got turned into anyone can do anything, which is nonsense. So that's happened a lot in this country, and it's a form of propaganda. It's a form of gaslighting, and the same with the American dream. When you read the documents of the founders, and not just the founding fathers, the founding mothers as well. And I'm forgetting her name, but there's somebody who wrote a book on this called The Founding Mothers. It's worth looking into. She assembles some of this there.
Is that Doris Kearns Goodwin or is that Cokie Roberts that
She
wrote?
is fantastic too.
Did
But
Cokie
no,
Roberts
it's
write that
somebody
one?
else whose
Okay.
name is eluding me at the moment.
Mm.
But and I'm thinking of Abigail Adams and many others, right? And we should have a lot of other voices in there that aren't. But there's this vision of what we could be as a country, and they used to use the word plurality. Today we would call it diversity, but it's unity in difference. And I think that's absolutely core to the vision of what they were aiming at, even with all their hypocrisy and status and male privilege and white privilege and all the rest of it. But there was something underneath that that was pure. And some of our better voices, including King and others who are alive today, speak to that vision. So I think it's a bad move to that so many of us do, where we just discount the whole thing. Oh, it was hypocritical from the word
Mm.
go. And, some of George Carlin's humor does that, and I like George Carlin's humor, but like even in interviews, he's kind of voiced that opinion, and I'm like, no, that's not true. It's not all bunk. It's not all hypocrisy. There's moments of truth in it. So for me, that's what the American dream is really about. And it got turned into own a home and, get a realtor and, right? The white picket fence and all that. Which I grew up in a house that had an actual white picket fence outside the front.
Oh my God.
So it was the whitest house in the whitest family and it was just an incredible collision of whiteness.
Well, the capitalists
All the
got a hold of,
shadows.
yeah, the capitalists got a hold of it. I mean,
Yeah,
I just think, yeah, it's just interesting because by the time you and I were born, like there was already the story. And so the
yeah,
American dream became more about consumerism really than
yeah,
values. And I like how in the video how you talk about it as it was based on the ideals of collective equality and fairness. So, something really sinister that's happened and happening right now, but there is we know it and we're fighting it is, reflected in Jeff Bezos's, he's the owner of what is it called? The Washington Post, I think is the
yeah.
paper.
That's right.
And he not only started messing with, what is the purpose of, the newspaper by not making an endorsement in the election, and then also saying that the editorial page now was going to focus solely on personal liberty and something else. I can't remember what else. Maybe it was free speech. Not, and if people think about it, we've also been trained to not understand that the original founding documents, ideas, were not about the personal liberty to do what you want to do to other people,
Yeah,
right? So it's like, okay, I have personal liberty, but it's limited by its impact on others, right? So what he's talking about is, and this is reflected in a recent Supreme Court decision that basically said to a corporation, yes, you can have raw sewage in drinking water.
yeah,
So personal liberty is turned into the liberty of capitalists to be free to do whatever, no matter the consequences. Like if you think right now, the way that we held the tobacco industry accountable couldn't happen today.
yeah.
It couldn't
Yeah, 'cause
happen today.
they own all the legislature at the national level anyway, and yeah, I mean, to go back to the developmental piece we were talking about earlier, the idea of freedom means I can do whatever I want. That's somewhere between 5 and adolescence. Frank Zappa actually
Well,
had
they
a,
call that the all-powerful I.
yeah,
Yeah.
the omnipotent eye, yeah.
Yeah.
Frank Zappa had, I forget the name of the song. My memory's not very good today, but he has this lyric where he goes, "Freedom mean, how does he put it? Free is when you don't want to pay for nothing or do nothing. We want to be free, you know."
Yeah.
It's like that, like puer, as Jung would call it, right?
Yeah.
It's just so ungrown up.
It's not responsible, right? Like play
Yeah.
that out. And, and the other thing that I didn't realize, that I think the light side of everything that's going on, this regression, is that there is a hunger for deeper understanding. So I just know so much more than I did before. And one of the things I discovered is that in our country, the root of conservative is to conserve the institutions that protect individual rights.
Yep.
And then, of course, liberal, our whole founding documents are based on liberalism. The
Hmm.
fact that individuals get rights, we're like the first country to do that, that just by being born, you are given individual rights. So that is a liberal idea. And that conservative didn't mean like staying in the past. It meant conserve the institutions that will maintain the focus on individual rights.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that makes so much sense to me. I've never read that anywhere.
I'm thinking of a guy from England named what was it, Edmund Burke or Edward Burke, I forget, who noticed that one of the kings was rolling over everything, and he said, "Well, wait a minute, we have institutions here that we can't burn down." And he was the one who actually coined the word conservative.
Mm,
We have to preserve some of this. And Jung, in a lot of his writings, mentions he doesn't always use the word conservative, but sometimes he does. And some of his positions are what we would now think of as a moderately conservative position. So that was something that even Jung identified with, but it has a vastly different meaning now. The word conservative has been stolen, really, from
that's what I was going to say.
Goldwater and who were the other people? Nixon, the whole Southern strategy of Nixon to appeal to both Democrats and Republicans who didn't want equality for anybody but themselves, their own
Mhm.
white selves. So this was a conscious effort that got going when we were kids, actually. So the people who now call themselves conservatives, who are actually authoritarians,
Yeah,
don't know some of the history about it.
I know. I know. So that's why I like to take time to like share these little, because I figure if I'm surprised by that, and I'm kind of a nerd and I'm doing a lot of reading, that I think it helps. It is a circling back.
Yeah,
So you also talk about the importance of vision um, during these times. We have a breakdown going on right now. And listening to your video reminded me of a quote on Facebook and a very beautiful picture of Maya Angelou. And the quote was, "In times like these, the artists go to work," or like
yeah,
the artists know what to do. Artists not being like paintbrush artists, but like you literally, I wrote a blog post, you literally every day are creating something by walking out the door and choosing your words or choosing to notice a bird or whatever, or how you approach a relationship. And, we can get weighed down by the despair. But I'm always scolding white people. I'm like, African Americans, like, they still haven't arrived in their freedom, and yet they go to church and they sing gospel music, and they're like, let's keep on. Like, fighting is just part of our. So stop whining, white people.
giving up is privilege,
Exactly, right?
total privilege, right? You can give up and nothing will happen to your income, and yeah.
Yeah.
Toni
So,
Morrison speaks to that too, that
mm,
relationship between keeping going and art.
well, also, I don't know where I heard this from, in a chat. Maybe it was Michael Bernard Beckwith about how the Renaissance was a response to another period of regression, Dark Ages. And during the Renaissance, nobody knew there was a Renaissance going on. Like there wasn't a name, oh, we're in a Renaissance. No, it wasn't until, I don't know, decades later, 100 years, I don't know, maybe 100 years later. And then we could see what we couldn't see, what we were living through. And I think there's more consciousness on the planet now that we can do this faster because there's like Eckhart Tolle would say there's that tipping point, I think maybe we've reached in consciousness. So we can quickly like, sort of we know that we're going through a renaissance right now. We're back in that renaissance. People didn't know it. They just did what they did. And so this is our renaissance.
Yeah,
So,
I think some of what is continuing to feed us is the Harlem Renaissance, full of
mm,
people, creative people who kind of knew they were going through something new.
mm.
So that helps us, we carry forward from that too.
Oh, yeah, right, exactly, exactly. So the consciousness can help accelerate it. Yeah. So I remember during maybe it was our last, I can't believe our last chat was last July, but
Yeah,
time flies. You talked about transcending the age, or maybe you didn't say it this way, but I took it as transcending the age of the hero, which of course I have a problem. We know that the hero myth is masculinized and westernized, and the heroine is part of the hero because the heroine is the part after the journey where he comes back and shares the new knowledge, insight, or goods, or whatever it was, and it's about returning to relationship. So there's that whole thing, but you had said something about that you were having conversations or like things were popping up about the hero, the community playing the role of hero. And then I put in my notes that I knew that there was something different, and I'm a superhero movie. So, when you talk about the edge people and people who are like sci-fi, fantasy, so
yep.
the movie Black Adam, and I
Mhm.
thought, doesn't anybody else see what's going on here? In that movie, it's interesting because the person that you think is going to be the hero isn't. It's actually a child. And there's some ancient myth involved there that's being pulled forward. And there is also Black Adam, who's played by The Rock. He's kind of a bad guy, but he ends up being a helpful character. So you also have like the dark being coming into with the light. And in the end, after they save the world, everybody wants to put him on the throne. And he walks up this sort of broken throne. Maybe I shouldn't say this to people. They'll maybe not watch it, but he walks up and he sits down and he gets really comfortable. Because of course he's going back to being a bad guy because he's the bad guy. He plays that role, the antagonist. And he's like, nope, not doing it. And he walks down and he looks at the people and he looks at this young boy and he's like, you all are the leader. There
Yep.
isn't one leader. And I thought, and then there's another I guess dystopian movie, but on Netflix. I can't remember what it was called, but the ending was very surprising. It was a different spin. And so again, you assumed a certain person was going to be the hero, and it was a younger person, and it was very surprising because it was the same sort of concept. So I do see bubbling up to the surface. There is this notion that, and you can, even as you are involved with different movements going on right now, they are talking about this is up to us. We can't look to any party. We can't, this is about us. So, um, anyway, so I don't know, whatever you want to add. Oh, you also had talked about your book, Myths Among Us. So that sort of came into the Black Adam movie too. So talk about what you mean by hero, post-heroic, that sort of thing.
Sure. By the way, there's a section in Myths Among Us with post-heroic myths, and where people solve problems through collaboration, through thought, through reflection, sometimes through action. Um, but it's not the same as the traditional hero stories, which the book also includes those as
Mhm.
well. I think there's a place for heroes, but it's just that we make that our model for everybody, and that's where we fall down. This country has a huge hero complex, and in mythology and folklore, the hero and the monster, or whatever serves as a monster, a villain, or whatever, they're always found together because they're two sides of the same archetype. So, as a result of that, we have a terrible shadow that's now coming out into the open in this country. Lots of people have known about it for a very long time because they've fallen into it. It's just, I mean, we could talk about that for hours, but the hero model, especially the masculinized hero, seems to be on its last legs,
Mhm.
and it's never been a good model for things like leadership. So, I think that it's meaningful to me that Hollywood screenwriting experts like Dara Marks are pushing for stories that move beyond the hero. And I don't know about you, but I'm burned out on hero films. There's a couple more I want to see. Like I have to go for a while not seeing them, and then I can
Yeah.
get one in, and then I have to not do it anymore for a while. But so the hero is, I mean, it's a Joseph Campbell Foundation idea that the hero can
Mhm.
be a group.
Mhm.
And kind of springing off of that, a slogan that I've repeated in some recent videos, I've ended them by saying, "We are the cavalry."
Yeah.
So one of the worst things about the shadow of the hero is that when the hero shows up, everybody goes into infant mode or child mode and
Yes.
says, "Save us," right? Which is a really immature response. There's there's um there's a scene in the book Children of Dune, Frank Herbert's book, where there's this guy called the preacher who's a blind preacher who comes in out of the desert and he preaches to this city. And there's this idea that he might be the Messiah, he might be Muad'Dib, returned from the
Love
dead.
Dune. I love Dune.
Yeah. And so, do you remember this scene where he's preaching and this woman in the crowd says, "Mahdi, help us." And he points a finger at her, although he can't see, but he points directly at her and he says, "You are the only help that remains."
Oh.
That's a good message for
Oh.
our time.
Yeah. By the way, the series, the Dune series, oh my God, is fantastic.
Mm,
It's, oh, okay. So many thoughts come up. That immature response. Well, I mean, think about it. You're really, one particular figure right now, and just sort of the willing giving over of your own mind
yeah.
and the twisting yourself into a pretzel today, even about what is happening, that you just can't even think about it, that you are giving over your power to this person, right? And
Yeah.
it also reminds me of Dr. Elizabeth Martin. She was in my program, and I don't know if she still works for the federal government. Who knows? Maybe she got fired. But her job was she was like in charge of Medicaid, like the inside. She was a civil servant, and she was in healthcare. And she had a really interesting, oh my gosh, her mother wound was really interesting. At 25, and when she lived in Texas, she was a prosecutor for the state, and the death penalty back then, like they just like killed people left and right. And that really traumatized her. So
Mm,
who knows, that impacted her path. But her dissertation was exploring the deeper meaning of the reaction to Citizens United.
mm,
And I learned so much. And one of the things that I learned was that the root of the corporation form had nothing to do with profit.
mm.
So again, this indoctrination that the purpose of a corporation is to make profit is wrong. It's just made up. And that the purpose of the corporate form was to be more efficient to serve the needs of the community as it grew.
Yeah.
So then look how it got warped by this one-sided masculine. So anyway, so her research was asking what is being asked of us right now, because we willingly, and some people have known this for decades, we willingly gave up our power to corporations, and now we're mad.
Yeah.
But we are the ones who wanted cheap goods from China, for example, or whatever. We willingly created the monster. And so now we don't want to deal with the mess.
Hmm.
So as far as superhero movies, Alita Battle Angel, there's one for you. If
Mm.
you haven't seen Alita Battle Angel,
I haven't.
oh, it's all reconciliation, masculine and feminine in so many ways. Haven't or it's fantastic. And so it isn't about a hero as much anyway. And then the other one is, Captain Marvel. Captain
Yeah.
Marvel, if you see that movie, when she is falling back and loses the power that she thinks the divine gave her, but wasn't really ever the divine power. And she finds her true power when she's released from that idea. right? And so she's just in her normal human form. She is already connected to the divine. So I don't know. I look sort of like at the trend in the superhero films, and I can see it evolving a little bit. But
Yeah.
okay,
I like
so oh, go ahead.
I like Goose the cat too.
Goose the cat. I don't know about Goose the cat. What?
Yeah. Goose the cat is in the films. Not really a hero figure, but very mysterious.
Oh, in Captain. Wait. Oh, I know who you're.
Captain Marvel.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love Goose. Oh, and the cat is a symbol, and oh yeah, I love it. So another thing I was thinking about that makes me think about your work is, Marianne Williamson. She
Mm,
has emerged as an interesting character. She's been a spiritual teacher for decades. I went through the Course in Miracles, which is something she's an expert in, and she calls it a Jungian framework. Actually, she calls the Course in Miracles a therapeutic approach,
mm,
but it calls on sort of these Christian symbols. So politics clearly wasn't ready for her. However, I feel like she's has been playing this role in helping people find the intersection between politics, spirituality, and depth psychology. That's what
mm,
I'm really particularly interested in. And she talks, like you, about our founding documents, as fallible as those people were, as moral statements, like moral aspirations, that has nothing to do with religious doctrine. And she also calls this time a spiritual revolution. So that brings me to your other, I think you even talk about this in a video, is that we are in a spiritual revolution. But I took so many notes. I'd love it if you talk about sort of like what you saw as kind of stages or components. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where you talked about first we were sort of attached to this, and then that wasn't resonating with people, and then that led to sort of this kind of thinking, and also once those more rigid, well, I don't know, wherever you want to go with that. One of the things that I think about is that the whole uh you talk about how the news story should be based on human relationships, ecology, and the importance of taking spiritual experiences seriously. That's sort of what I was getting at. And
yeah.
that made me remember that, this whole Christian doctrine that became dogmatic and has lost its like power, started with a single spiritual experience
Yeah.
that was about one man, and then how that experience then was received at
Mm,
the time. And then, that the power of that experience got, I don't know, corrupted, got exploited, lost its power, whatever it is. So, and then you also talk about revolution as a hearkening back. So, wherever you want to go with this notion of, your thoughts about this being a spiritual revolution, not meaning religious revolution, of course.
yeah. So much to potentially talk about
Yeah,
there.
sorry, I just threw a
I
bunch at
should
you.
maybe I'll throw out a term. This is another thing I haven't said in public yet, although I'm gonna make some videos about it. So
I feel so honored.
I coined a term for my own use that I have no idea if it's going to be useful for anybody else or not, but it helps me because I've got friends and colleagues who are earnest Christ followers, and I left the church behind decades ago, but some of what I absorbed from it remained with me, and including stuff from the teachings of Jesus as well. So there's a need, I think, especially in our troubled time, to distinguish between exactly what you were talking about, this corruption of the vision that happened, and it happened early on, like right
Yeah.
at the beginning, right?
Oh
Um,
yeah, there's a whole book on like Rosemary Ruther Radford, who traces back the feminist voices that were there right at the beginning of wanting
yep.
to interpret this experience, that they were just like quashed like a bug.
Yeah, you see that in some of the Gnostic texts, the Gospel of Mary, for instance, where she talks about the visionary aspects of her work with Jesus. And the male disciples who were there promptly go, "This is bullshit." He didn't say any of that, right? And so those texts are like almost 2,000 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, Christianopathy is the word I came up with to describe the shadow side of Christianity.
Mm.
So Christianopathy is also, it's very similar, maybe the same as what we now call Christian nationalism, in the sense that it takes all the values of Christianity, original Christianity, and it reverses them.
Mm.
So it attacks empathy, it attacks compassion, it attacks kindness, it attacks immigrants, all the things that Jesus stood for, right?
Mm.
And I grew up reading the Gospels. I'm very familiar with what the message is, and
Mm-hmm.
it inverts all of it. So
Mm.
Christianopathy as a kind of religious parallel to sociopathy,
Mm.
because sociopaths do that too. They bash empathy because they feel none of it. Um, they think compassion is ridiculous and they laugh at it. They're schemers. They want power. They want control, right? So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people who are under this shadow of Christianopathy aren't diagnosable as sociopaths, but the value system that they embrace is sociopathic,
Mm.
which is why it's so destructive.
Well, and talk about gaslighting. I mean,
Yeah,
that is gaslighting on steroids.
yeah,
I mean, you just think about, I mean, oh, in the last couple of weeks, Elon Musk, saying empathy is the downfall of Western civilization, and Bill Gates' ex-wife donating to girls and women's causes is destroying Western civilization. Yet he is like almost in tears because he's losing like half of his
yeah,
net worth, and he's like, "Oh, and Tim Walz, what a jerk." I mean, like that's gaslighting. What
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
and it's like there isn't even an adequate word for it, actually. I like Christian apathy because I mean, I don't that's not even I don't even know. Like I feel like we're lacking language for some of the extreme sort of dysfunction and disorder. And
yeah,
I mean, one thing it is doing is forcing people to become stronger,
yeah,
and I do see a trend of, I think it's anecdotal, but of like misfits and marginalized people just being like so over it. Like it's so ridiculous. They're like that's so weird that I guess I'm not even bothered by it. Like what? Like what? And I hope that that's shifting to, to a sense of power. And then, the term that I do like that's the most positive or light part of Christianity is Christ consciousness. So
yeah,
this is how people have just transcended. Christ consciousness doesn't belong to Christianity,
yeah,
but you can call on because Christianity was unique with this idea of redemption. I think, I don't know, maybe there's there is something different about it, but it doesn't belong to Christianity. It just ended up being coalesced in that language.
A key part of American gnosis. I'm actually making a little list of what characterizes it, and one of the key features of it is it often is Christian, but it welcomes in everybody.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
says, isn't it cool what the Vedas say? And isn't it cool what this says and that says and these people and so there's something about it. Part of the shadow though, you were mentioning Marianne Williamson. I think she's in that tradition. She's definitely in that Christian gnosis tradition, strongly
Well,
so.
she's Jewish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the way she teaches and what she teaches and the content of it really belong to that tradition. And there's people in the tradition that aren't Christians.
Yeah.
But I think part of the shadow of it too, though, Christian gnosis is literalism. That's part of I think, the shadow of how we do
Hmm.
spirituality. We
Hmm.
insist that it be factually, literally true
Yeah.
instead of just inspiring.
Yeah.
That's part of
Well,
what I'm pushing for in my own version of this, because I'm fine with these wisdom stories being wisdom stories. They don't
mhm.
have to be historically true. I don't care if Jesus lived or not.
Right. Well, like if you go to a Unitarian church, they'll say I went to a Christmas service and they said, whether you are a Christian, whether you think Jesus was real or you enjoy him as a concept, you're welcome here. It doesn't matter. Isn't it kind of about healing? So,
Yeah,
you know, it oh, I wrote this down, but now I don't know if I can remember why I wrote it down. But like, oh, like all these different religions, there is this need to separate first, right? So when we talk about like when we're born, we don't know we're separate from our mother, the body we came out of. And then at a certain point, in order to develop an ego, we have to have separation. And then there is this like coming back, right? The circling back to a sense of wholeness because you can become too separate. And I wonder if that's part of the evolution of sort of spirituality is that, yeah, there are these different ideas. Christianity is similar in that that's the right one. I don't know if Islam is the same way that theirs is the right one, but that there's the separation now is such that there's a breakdown and there has to be like this transcendence of all of the separate to coalesce as like this new whatever it is. Maybe it's just a word, maybe it's a framework, maybe it's a value, whatever it is. I like human flourishing. That's what I'm all about right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
It
don't know.
seems like when religions start, they do that because they have to distinguish between themselves and everybody else
Yes.
in terms of being new. Buddhism did that. It was a revolt against Hinduism in some ways, and
Mm.
Islam was a revolt against what was happening in that part of the world. And they said, no, we stand for these values. And so it does look like that at the very beginning. Part of the problem, though, is that the ambitious, the controlling, the emotionally immature get a hold of that, and then they start turning it into an ideology that's rigid. And that has happened to all the religions.
Yes, and that's the problem, the rigidity. And then you lose really you lose the gnosis part of it. Lose
Yeah.
the knowing. So, one of my favorite videos of yours is the edge people. I'm really identifying with that. I usually call myself a misfit or a nerd or quirky or something, but I like the edge people. It reminds me also of Hermes. So,
Mm.
Hermes, like being present when you're on the edge of consciousness and how sometimes he has to like push you over the edge. So it reminds me of that too. And maybe that's what the edge people are, is they're always kind of on the edge. That's what you're talking about. And it also reminded me of one, I don't know if you've heard of the book Indigo Children, the Indigo
Yeah.
Children. Oh, when I found that 20 years ago, I was like, I was trying to find my son, make sense of my son. And he really is an indigo child.
Mm.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this is me. Like, oh, I do belong someplace. And also, so in this video, you talk about like, first of all, I'd love for you to describe who these people are, because then some of my listeners will be like, oh, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. And then you can touch also on what used to bother me when people were detaching from identifying themselves as religious is the way that the surveys were conducted. If they said they were non-religious, it implied and they concluded that that meant they weren't spiritual at all,
Mm.
right? And then they've started to like be more nuanced about it. And for the most part, I don't know how many, but for the most part, people who say I'm non-religious, but I'm spiritual, meaning there's some connection. I feel connected to something that's bigger than me, and that this is like the largest and fastest growing group. So you could talk about that, and then you finally ask, what would happen? What a great, that's such you are an imaginer. What would happen if the people of this group somehow identified their connection, coalesced? So, and then that leads us to your lamplighter project. So yeah, so start with
Yeah.
the edge people and nons and
The edgy people.
ooh, edgy. I like that too.
So, yeah, the term came into my mind, I think, probably because of my friend Victoria Lors, who uses the term edge walker, which I think is even cooler. And she uses it in an eco-spiritual context. So I was talking a little more broadly than that, but that's part of it, absolutely part of it. And I recommend her work, by the way. The Church of the Wild is a great organization. Church of the Wild Network, the Wild Church Network, sorry. It's worth looking into.
And what
And
is her name? I'm sorry, what is her name?
Victoria Loors,
Okay.
Loors. She's got some books out. She's taking spirituality outdoors, and
Hmm.
the organization welcomes people of any faith or none that they identify with. So when I made that video, I was thinking about the folks I mentioned when we first started talking today, the outsiders, the people of the mark, as Hesse calls us. In another novel, he says we have one dimension too many. Those of us who are kind of on the edge of things, dreamers, visionaries, intuitives, depth people. So a lot of us in depth psychology. And we roughly overlap with a big chunk of a statistical group in this country called nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And those are the people in Pew polls who don't identify with a traditional religion. So most of those people, the nuns, are it's a pity they pick something that sounds like cloistered women, you
Yeah.
know. But be that as it may, yeah, we need a different term. But so they're a big group in the U.S. There was, according to the numbers, 2% were not members of any major religious organization in 1948. Today, it's a third of us. We're actually the largest religious group in the country. So a third of adults, and that's the ones who fill out surveys and answer calls and stuff like that. It's probably larger than that. So I was raising the question, well, what if we all got together? This has huge implications culturally, politically. Those of us who like the idea of a new story could work on that. So I've been using the term recently, the term lamplighter, which I got from my own fiction, my Lamplighter trilogy. And it refers to people who bring light into the world, not partisan. So they're not necessarily Democrat or Republican or anything, but people who have a deeper view of things, people who share what they know, who tell different kinds of stories about how things are, and bring sometimes when it's needed inspiration, but also truth, real ideal distinction. People who are comfortable with storytelling of different kinds. Many are highly creative. So artists, performers, dancers, filmmakers, what have you. Many are introverts who don't like loud activism for whatever reason. So the question I've been sitting with for a while is, what can we do?
Mhm.
And I think the first step is get together and talk.
Yeah.
So that's where I got that word lamplighter, and I made a whole series of videos on that. I'm looking into some space on a couple of places. So Mighty Networks, I've actually built a community in there. It's not live yet.
I think it's fantastic. And this is like a weird thing that's coming up, but lamplighter being, bringer of light or even just different perspective. So oddly, when I was forced to start my first business because I got fired from a job and couldn't get a job to save my life, and I just started this and I was like, what am I going to name my business? And at the time, this was 2004, the internet was so rudimentary. I found this website and it was symbols. So even then, that's way before depth psychology. I was like, okay, I want to find a symbol. And I didn't get past A because I chose alinea, which is French, alinea, and it was the paragraph symbol. And I
Hmm.
read it, and the definition was the beginning of a new train of thought. And I was like, oh my God, that's me.
Yep.
Because people would say, oh, I didn't really think about it that way. And I remember like years later having a conversation, being at Oktoberfest, having a beer with my former husband. And this was during a time when this was probably at least 10 years ago, maybe 15, when Prozac was like being prescribed at like an epidemic level. And I was like, I said, this is a problem. If the majority, and there were already dystopian movies about like drugging the general population. And my former husband goes, well, but it's good for the economy. And I said, I was horrified, but I said, oh, what is the purpose of the economy?
Mhm.
And I was like, I never hear anybody ask that question. They just listen to the talking heads tell you what the purpose of the economy is. So like even like asking the right question is like
Yep.
being a lamplighter, right?
Yeah.
I signed up. I mean, I haven't yet, but I'm signing up. So
Sometimes it's it's the child who calls out the emperor's naked. Sometimes it's artists like Andy Goldsworthy who have a sharp sense of place and work with nature,
Mhm.
co-create instead of thinking it's all up to us.
Yeah.
There's lots of forms this can take. I'm actually writing right now a lamplighter manifesto. So, a common statement of values as a draft. One person can't come up with all this stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm just doing it to see what resonates with people and what we can get behind.
Ooh, I love it. And you might at some point want to do a community visioning session. That's one of the things I used to
Yeah.
do with my nonprofit and school clients. I was like, who are all the stakeholders? Be really, really creative about it.
Yep.
And, just here's the mission and let them tell you what that means to them. And then you
Yeah,
are using the language of the people. Like we need an America-wide community visioning session.
we do.
I've always thought that. Like, I don't know how you could do that easily with technology, but this is by design so that it doesn't happen. Anyway, so speaking of creativity, you're describing creating the lamplighter community. You're on fire creatively. Holy crap, you pump out the videos and the books, and I'm like, I'm still trying to finalize my memoir. Um, and and it expresses your evolution, how
Mm.
you're evolving, from the first book I read of yours, Terror Psychology, to like what you're doing now. So what do you want my listeners to know about like your creative works, what's available, projects, and what do you want from people? What do you need help with? What do you want support for? I know you were looking for takers to be part of your first the community, and it's free. And where can they not only get something of value, but how can they support you too? Because you're doing important work.
Yeah, thank you. One thing to do would be to just visit my website because I try to centralize everything there. So if they go to chalquist.com, my last name, there's actually a link on the very first page to some free resources, lamplighting resources that I put together in a blog. So there's even a 40-page lamplighter handbook. So that's all free. It's all downloadable. There's other sources too. I'm in YouTube, and I was going through videos and I thought, pretty much all of these have to do with lamplighting. And I've got a lot of videos in YouTube. So I mean, that's a way to do it. Just I think following the work,
And you
but
have a
also
newsletter.
yeah, I've got the newsletter. If you go to my website in like 10 seconds, there's one
Mhm.
pop-up and it asks if you want the newsletter. It's once a month. I don't spam people. And the other thing I would say is if you're looking for some hope that's realistic, in other words, acknowledging how bad things are and yet looking for some inspiration, I wrote a
Mhm.
whole trilogy set in the near future around 2100, and it's called the Lamplighter Trilogy, hence the word. And it deals with this. How are we going to show up as climate chaos accelerates, as the wrong kinds of people take control of entire countries? Who are the people who are going to show up and challenge that and try to move our species forward? And my novels are all about that.
Soul Mapper is the first one, right? I'm
Yep.
reading, I'm reading it now. I love it.
Good.
Such attention to detail. Oh my gosh.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying it. But I have to finish my memoir before I can finish it. I gotta finish
Yeah.
my own book and publish it. So,
Priorities.
I just have to get it done. It's been 5 years. And I know that my energy is like being dragged down. Not, I feel energetic, but you know what I mean? It's an incomplete project and it's time to complete it. And then I'm going to feel energized. So I will, in the description box, put a lot of these links, but then in my newsletter, I'm going to put your
Hmm.
books and separate links for everything. I didn't know you have lamplighter resources in a handbook. That reminds me of, I just saw, I don't know who's promoting this, How to Start an Anti-Fascist Book Club.
Ah, cool.
So people can do it. They don't, right? So this is all about, oh, I love what's going on right now. So, and what call to action do you have for my listeners? So there are opportunities to act, as you said. And what's really cool is I was an activist in my 20s. It wasn't dangerous like it is now, but I was, so I know what that experience is. But there are people being activists now that never were activists, and I love it. And I also, as I talked, I'm trying to fill that gap between that devastation,
Mm.
despair, anger, resistance to, but we have to be without vision, the people perish. You can't stay in the muck of the
Yeah.
anger, of the annoyance. You can't be triggered by those people anymore. You got to get over that. And you have to like really be intentional with your energy. So you can keep the feistiness, but it needs to be forward looking or we won't get out of this. So I don't know. So maybe there's like a couple of ways that you can, there's all sorts of resources for how to act. But what about helping people like, just try igniting their imagination? Or is there a way to prepare for allowing your imagination and then even like explore just I know this is getting complicated, but what's the easy way that people can start to like relax into the part of themselves that can direct them during this time where the mind wants to stay sort of in that fear. And then we talked about how they can become part of your, wait, did we talk about how they can become part of your community? Anyway,
Starting with my website. Yeah.
okay.
So, my takeaway would be fantasize about the world you want to live in
Oh, I love it.
and engage your body and your emotions as you do it.
Okay. And maybe record it somehow, write or
Yeah, write
voice
it down, talk to
record or
people about it. I often tell people show up in the world where you are called to.
hmm.
So that's another one to do. So maybe
Oh,
two takeaways.
okay. So for people who aren't familiar with that sense of calling, how do they know where they might be being called?
I think through the first one, you can determine what you feel most strongly about. It's different with everybody. Like
Mhm.
one person might be fantasizing about, the world once we come out of all this madness and we have leaders instead of rulers and we're all in charge to some extent.
Mhm.
And we've come of age as a species, full spectrum human beings in a diverse world culture. That's what comes up for me
Mhm.
when I think about all this. For some people, it may be more specific, like there's people who are trying to make sure we all have clean food. So
Mm.
it may be an agricultural vision of some kind.
Mm. Okay.
For somebody else, it may involve children. Um, so it's different for everybody, but by fantasizing, you can home in on what your feelings are about where you're called.
Oh,
And
okay.
when you're working on one thing, you're working on everything.
Right.
It may not look like that, but it is because it's all together in one
It's
system.
all interconnected. Okay, so the fantasy, just whatever comes up, and then follow the emotion, the feeling
Yeah,
tone.
Young called it active imagination. So
Yeah.
to just really sit with the fantasy. One of the things that our society does is it drums fantasy out of us unless we're in a movie theater. But
Yeah.
to really take time to ask yourself, what does a better world really look like to me?
Mhm.
And
Don't you
what's the
think?
world I
Oh,
want to live in?
don't you think that's part of the intentional like shock and awe is really meant to exhaust you so that you
Yeah.
can't imagine anymore? I think you
Yep.
said that in your video. All right. Well, thank you so much for making time for another awesome chat.
Thank you so much for this. Yeah,
I
this was great.
I appreciate. Well, you have all these thoughts too, and sometimes they go viral on TikTok, but we have to share each other. We got to spread the word. So
Absolutely.
So, yeah, anyway, so to my listeners, I hope you enjoyed, I know you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Craig Chalquist, and I hope you feel a little less angry or disoriented and more inspired to find your role in ushering in the age of human flourishing. It's already coming. You might as well tag along and express what's been waiting to be expressed from and through you anyway. And one more thing, if you enjoyed this interview and my podcast, please like and subscribe and share. And maybe you want to support me as a creator by being like a $3 a month subscriber. That would be awesome. I'll include the link for that too. And until next time.